I will call the meeting to order. It's the meeting of the Committee of the Whole and the Committee on Finance and Property. Once I read the script, I will turn everything over to Council Flaherty, who is the Chair of Finance and Property. Sound good? Hey, it's 7 o'clock. Miss Dixon, I'm going to say your name in a minute. Call to order this meeting of the Committee on Finance and Property and the Committee of the Whole. Ms. Dixon, could you please call the roll? Thank you.
Ames.
Here.
Copeland. Flaherty.
Here.
Feldman.
Here.
Flowers.
Here.
Hausman.
Here.
Rotundo.
Here.
Rand.
Here.
And Guanci.
And I'm here. And within those 8 names, the Committee on Finance and Property is Councilor Tim Flaherty is the chair, myself, and Councilor Estelle Rand. Script from remotely conducted Finance and Property and Committee of the Whole meeting, June 1st, 2021. Introduction to remote meeting. Good evening. This open meeting of the Finance and Property Committee and the Committee of the Whole budget meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020. Due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19, I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded by the City of Beverly, and I'm confirming all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Dynamite. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspended the requirement of open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as adequate alternative public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. And Kim Allen from BevCam has done a remarkable job over the past 15 months. Thank you. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting does not have public participation. The public will be allowed to comment on the budget at our public hearing at a special meeting on June 14th. Accordingly, please be aware that other participants or viewers may be able to see or hear you, and anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. You have the option to turn off your video if you're participating via computer. All participants should keep their microphones and phones muted unless recognized by Council Flaherty to reduce background noise and feedback. Please wait until the person speaking is finished before speaking so we can clearly hear all participants. There'll be no votes this evening, so that said, I will hand it off to Council Flaherty. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to give a little bit of an overview for the public and for some of the new councilors of how we go about this process, especially this is our second year on Zoom. The first 2 meetings tonight and tomorrow night will be on Zoom. Next Tuesday's budget meeting, Finance and Property, will actually be our first meeting at Finance and Property at City Hall next week. So a little bit of an overview. We do not go try to be as efficient as possible and try to get the information that we need for questions heard for the rest of the council, and then ask questions of the mayor or the department heads. What will happen tonight? The mayor will go first, followed by Jerry Perry, and then I will call we have about 6 or 7 people on this list that will go tonight. They will present their budget, and then we'll ask questions of Finance and Property. But I also encourage the rest of the council that if you have questions, I think it's important to, as a committee of the whole, that we ask questions of the department heads and of the mayor and of Mr. Ailes to do that, because we do not, I think it's easier to do that than waiting until we Finance and Property goes and then the committee of the whole. Obviously, there's going to be questions even from the Finance and Property that we might think of in 2 weeks that we didn't think of going through these budget deliberations. So I think it's important that I hear from everybody, and then go from there. again, we're not going to go line by line. We're going to go department by department. So we're able to ask more questions, and just like last year, come prepared. And if somehow we have a question tomorrow night on the budget analyst position, we can always revisit that as well. Last year, all things considered, with Zoom, the first time being on Zoom, it went fairly well. And next week, I think it will go as well, going department by department. Again, it gives more time. Does anybody from the council have any questions before I bring the mayor forward to talk about his budget? Okay, hearing none. Mayor Cahill, Honorable Mayor Michael Cahill, you can present your budget, and we'll ask questions after.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you noticed okay. I just want to share a couple of observations with you on the executive department budget, and then maybe go right to any questions or thoughts you folks have. You will see in the executive department that we have 2 new full-time employees, and obviously you know them well, and we've been working with them for part of this current fiscal year. We together put money into the executive budget last year, $150,000, so that we could address racial equity issues. During this past year, we used that money for some trainings for city staff, some board volunteers, elected officials, including us. And then we used some additional amount of that money to bring on board the racial equity audit consultant team, who are now working with us and will be for the next several months. So a chunk of that cost is being paid in this fiscal year, and an additional chunk will be paid in the next fiscal year. I think the total on that is roughly $125,000. And you'll see on page 5, you'll see a number that reflects finishing the equity audit work and some additional targeted work that will sort itself during the course of the year. The big remaining chunk of that $150,000 is being built into the executive budget for this coming year in the form of Abu Toppin's salary for a full year. Abu, as we all know, is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director who we hired back in January. And then the other full-time position that we see in the executive is the Sustainability Director position. And you know well that we hired Irina Keefe, and she started in mid-October. The Sustainability Director position is one we had all talked about prior to COVID. I think we all knew that it was really coming time for this position. Didn't quite see how we were going to do it in the middle of COVID when we were looking at last year's budget. And then we had an anonymous donor come forward and offer to fund the position for 3 years at the levels of 80% of the cost year 1, 60% year 2, 40% year 3. Irina started mid-October, so between now and mid-October, we'll continue to pay 20% of the cost of the Sustainability Director position. From mid-October through the end of next fiscal year, we'll be paying 40% of that cost of Irina's position. So those are a couple things that you see. I should say those are a couple lines you see, and they relate directly to our 2 newest staff in Abu and Irina. Beyond that, I think maybe it's probably best for me to just turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, and see who has some thoughts or some questions.
I have a quick question. Do you think long-term those positions will go into the HR department, or do you see yourself carrying that in your department?
Well, they're positions that report within this department, right, to the chief of staff and then through her to me. And when I say that, we all meet weekly and we all talk very regularly. But no, these are positions that I think are best situated where they are.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from and before I go to the rest of the council, Councilor Rand, our vice president, and council president wants to make up the committee of finance and property. Do any of the committee have any questions before I move on to the council?
I do, Councilor Flaherty, if you're ready for me.
Go right ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. I was wondering if, Mayor, first of all, thank you for talking about the funding that for the equity and inclusion director, and then kind of talking about how that funding is spread out throughout the budget this year. I'm really excited that that's still in there, and I feel like that was such an accomplishment that we all made together last year. So I'm really proud of Beverly for committing to this work. Also, what a wonderful pride flag raising event today. I feel like we've really, I mean, it was the best one I've been to. So I'm just really, really happy about that for our city and the people who were supporting with that. So, so I'm hoping you could, Mayor Cahill, can you talk through a little bit about the part of your budget that goes out to those kind of areas of the city that we as a city put some funding into that is not city work, but we support it, like the line items. I think they start with
They're the
on
purchase
page
of service,
19.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Sure.
So, and I know some of them I remember where they go, but some of them I just kind of, especially for new counselors and just to refresh my mind, what is exactly being supported. And specifically, I wanted to know the city youth line item. How much of that funding, I think this year it's $68,450. How much of that goes to salary and how much of it goes to direct services for the youth at the McPherson Center? And then the rest of those purchase of services, if you can just kind of like refresh my mind where it goes.
Sure. So
Thank you.
let's go right down the list. Just as a kind of a catch-all here, we must RFP these, or should I say, we must kind of make them known publicly, and then organizations can apply for them. And we do know that in recent years, typically there's been one application in each area. But if there were another not-for-profit interested in trying to tap some of these funds beyond the ones who do apply for them, we would be bound to evaluate all applications. The first line, the emergency shelter in support of Beverly homeless population, that has in the past gone to River House, now part, larger of Lifebridge, which is Salem and Beverly. They have not come forward looking for that money recently. And so it's available, and I think it really behooves them to try to tap those resources, but it hasn't happened recently. In fairness, there's been so much on their plate during COVID, and there have been some other temporary one-time or repeating, but maybe a couple time repeating, but not to be their long-term funding streams that I think they've focused their efforts on during this past year. Outreach and coordination work for Beverly residents needing critical resources. This is one that we have had Beverly Bootstraps apply for this in the past. And Mr. Ailes, you can correct me if I'm missing anything here. Consulting, that's a different line. That's one we keep within the executive office, I believe, Mr. Ailes, and we tap as needed. City youth, that's what goes to the McPherson. The question you ask, I'm going to call the folks at the Y and get back to you between now and tomorrow night, because my gut is it pretty much all goes to salary, if not some supplies. But we know that services are heavily people dependent. It's who delivers the services. So by and large, I think we're going to see supporting the costs of the several staff people that they have on throughout the year and seasonally. But I'll check on that for you. I will say that we all got to hear from the folks at the Y just last week about the program, what they've been able to do during COVID, what they're going to try to kick back off this summer. So I'll specifically ask that question and try to get your breakdown between now and tomorrow night. Economic stimulus, that one goes in part. Well, again, anyone can apply for these. What we've seen in the past is 5,000 go to the Greater Beverly Chamber in recent years, and 10,000 go to the incubator the biotech incubator over at the Cummings Center that we know well. And then the last line here is for the summer learning, summer literacy, summer learning initiative that we run at Hannah School and in partnership with the Y. Mornings at Hannah School, afternoons at the Y. What we've tried to do is provide 15% of that budget through city funds. It really matters for our many partners, be they, for-profit, not-for-profit, grantors. It really matters that they know that the city is bought into the program. Our goal this summer, our plan at present, is to run it for 120 kids in 3 grade levels. If you remember before COVID, we were able to run it for 180 kids. We're not quite ready to be that full up, in each room, but the plan is, it's part, I shouldn't say in each room. We're comfortable with the 20 children and 3 adults per room model, but the ability to then run all the programming for them in the afternoon in limited space over at the Y, because they have all their other camps there as well. So the budget we're looking at for 120 kids this summer is just about 200,000. So if you look at 15% of that, it's to 30,000. That's where the ask is there. Turn the page, and the supported downtown initiatives. Again, this is available for anybody to apply for who fits the description. In the past, Beverly Main Streets has applied. We did get a recent request from them to do more. Given where we're at with this budget, what we're looking at, and I did speak with Jen and some of Jim Wallace and some of the e-board members. What we're hoping to do is to work with Main Streets to see just exactly what they need this year and try to provide that together in ARPA funds, and then look again as we approach next year's budget, when we hope and expect there'll be some relief with the decrease in some of the borrowing load. So some of the debt service load. So we're thinking that if it makes sense to up that number, it makes more sense to do it in the operating budget next year than now. And we're going to try to look to ARPA resources to try to make sure they get what they need. I think we all recognize the great value in regular times and the incredible work that they've done this past year, Main Streets, who I'm talking about, and the importance of them long-term to helping our downtown economy, grow and thrive. So that's the line that they have applied for in recent years and been able to tap.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that you're still going to be looking out for what they might need, and it sounds like there's going to be a continued effort to support Main Street. So,
and Council, we all know that they are a very valued partner, and that they've done incredible work this past 15 months, and we recognize that it's really tapped. It's really put them in a critical space in terms of trying to survive themselves and be here to help help support and promote and grow our downtown economy in future years. So I think we all together, you as a council, us as the administration, we all want to work together with them to make sure that that's possible.
Yeah, agreed. I think just one more, actually 2 small questions, if that's all right, through you, Chairman Flaherty.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So, and then on page 21, are we looking at the reserve for appropriation as well as part of your budget, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. So quick question. I just noticed that the reserve for separation of service buyouts is much larger than it usually is. Can you just tell me more about that?
Sure. I'll give you the overview, and then Mr. Ailes can give you the details. You folks have been in the council for the last several years. Remember that a few years ago, we decided to take that reserve for separation, which is that's a fund for money that employees at retirement are able to take with them for things like sick days unused and vacation unused and the like. And what we now do is we pool that in this line within the executive budget at the beginning of the year, and during the course of the year, it gets transferred out to different departments as they make those payments out to people as they're leaving city's employ. So in terms of why that number is what it is in the 2021 revised budget, Mr. Ailes?
Yes. It typically is budgeted at the beginning of the year somewhere between $350,000 to $400,000, depending upon the year, depending upon whether or not we know certain individuals and departments may be retiring in the coming year. However, what actually gets spent and transferred out of this varies from year to year. And I actually did run some past reports to show what we typically spend in this category. In some instances where we spend more than is budgeted, we may seek, funding from some other area in the budget, like a reserve for unforeseen, or within an individual department's budget to help augment the cost if it exceeds this line item. But we think on average, this 370 or 395,000 tends to be around the mean of years. In FY15, we spent 450,000. FY16, we spent 161. FY17, we spent 320. FY18, we spent 240. FY19, we spent 215. FY20, we spent 578. And then this year, we will exhaust the full 370.
Okay, so where it says, I think I was just thinking of it wrong. So, for example, where it says that the revised 2021 budget is $26,000 some odd dollars, that's just what we have remaining after paying out all of the buybacks. Is that
Exactly.
right? Okay,
Yep.
Got it. All right. Thank you. I kind of had forgot that. My last question is for this overall budget, how much of the differences that we're seeing in the 2021 budgeted to the actual are kind of differences that we're that our city are reimbursable by state or federal funding due to COVID? How much of that is sort of eligible for kind of reimbursements, or that maybe we're even collecting that funding already?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, you want me to handle it?
Please.
Yeah, because
Thank
I
you.
work very closely with Carol Logolevitz, who's been kind of the point person for accounting for all the pandemic-related expenses. And as you know, there are many streams that we're trying to juggle, whether that's federal, whether that's CARES, whether now we have ARPA. What we do is when a cost is identified as appropriate for those funding sources, we will transfer the actual expenditures over to those funds, separate and distinct from what you see in front of you. So none of these
Okay.
expenditures that are here in front of you today will ultimately end up being reimbursed through CARES or ARPA or any of those sources. They're already accounted for in a separate bucket.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Flaherty.
If I could add one last thing, we've fallen, and it was me who started it, we've fallen into the acronym speak. So anyone who's watching at home who doesn't know what ARPA means, it's the American Rescue Plan Act. That's the most recent aid package passed by the federal government that for the first time has money that will go directly to cities and towns. So there's an amount that we will be getting that we'll be figuring out the eligibility for that and having, lots of conversations about how to best manage that and utilize it over the coming years. It's money that can be actually spent over the next 4.5 years, I think. So I think by the end of 2026, we have from now to then to utilize it for, to help recover from COVID as a community.
And just to help clarify too, I know it was a few years ago, Councilor Rand, but probably about 25 years ago, but the McPherson Youth Center, just to clarify people at home, the McPherson Youth Center is run by the Youth Collaboration Board, which is made up by the city and the Y. It's not just a Y function, it's a city and collaboration with the Y. And that was probably about $20,000 of, heating, electricity, to fund that facility. I can't speak of the, supplies line, which has probably grown, but that's probably a ballpark, I would think. But it's, I would think it would be a little bit more. I'm just not sure how much more. That's from a historical perspective. Anybody else? I think Councilor Hausman, you had your hand raised.
Yes, Chairman Flaherty, thank you very much. Yeah, my question, I guess, is really for the mayor, and it's sort of a 50,000-foot question, maybe a little bit, but it's, Mr. Mayor, if you could sort of reflect upon or comment upon the nature of the increase in staffing on the executive side, or these various different positions that have been added that report directly to your office. They certainly have been very helpful to the council. I know that I as a city councilor have been able to sort of tap the expertise and their availability as a resource. If you could sort of maybe reflect or comment on how the mayor's office in particular, but the city government in general, benefits by the addition of these staff positions to your office.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Great opportunity to share a few thoughts. Thanks for the question. So you're right that that these people in these positions they're really meant to be resources for all of us. And so you as counselors, I think have really done well, with, and some of your predecessors as well, have done well with being able to have people to reach out to get into the weeds of different issues. When I was first elected, there was not a chief of staff position, and Beverly was one of 3 cities in the state. I always get it confused because there are a few cities that don't have mayors, but I think there are 42 cities, and 39 of them had chiefs of staff. Beverly didn't at that time, although Beverly had under Mayor Scanlon, but part of, I think, the effects of going through 2 recessions almost back to back was that certain things got left out. And so one of the unfortunate impacts of that was several department heads had found themselves in those early years of the 2010s, particularly during and coming out of the Great Recession. Several department heads had found themselves handling a lot of that work, which I think, really gets in the way of department heads doing a lot of their other work. So we created that position, and it was, for those first few years, it was me and it was Kevin Hartunian, our former chief of staff. And I think we saw the value, and then we all saw just how underwater we could quickly get with the volume of work, particularly the volume of constituent service work that comes through. And so with your support, we also then created the constituent services director / program manager position. And I think they have delivered as advertised. They've and look, nothing's ever perfect. We all are juggling a lot of things, but we've got that ability to try to pay attention to and move issues. And I think the team we have in place, Stephanie Bellotti as chief of staff, Jocelyn Kersker as constituent services director / program manager, and we can never get that title to where it rolls off the tongue, do fantastic work and do provide that resource we need. We also, during my first year, which was also Councilor Rand's first year, who else was in their first term at that point? At any rate, we spent time together and several councilors working to determine how to move forward with how we manage our grant needs. And we saw the wisdom in creating the grant director position. I think, again, with Catherine Barrett at the helm, I think that position, proves itself over and over and over again. From a real basic way of looking at it, if a grant director brings in $1 more than they cost, then you're on the plus side. But, in our case, that position helps bring in millions of dollars more. And there were grants that were coming in prior to Catherine, or prior to the position being created. But even at that, the load on different departments, when department personnel had to do all that work of chasing down grants, finding them, doing all the collection and writing of grants to secure them, doing all the data collection and reporting. The position has become such an incredible resource to all our different departments and does, brings in many more grants than we ever got before. So on that front, all positive things as well. I don't want to miss anybody. I mean, you all know the worth of Martha Lewis, who, before I started, it was just Martha and Mayor Scanlon, and I don't know how they got enough done. God bless them. They were both working so incredibly hard at that. But Martha proves her worth day in and day out, right through the years, as we all well know. Just an incredible asset to the city. And then we've got the two newer positions that I touched on at the beginning. As I said, on the sustainability front, we all were getting to the place of knowing, right? We recognize that the work on sustainability, be it trying to address impacts of climate change that we're starting to see and needing to respond to, be it trying to move us forward on cutting greenhouse gas emissions and doing so in a, really comprehensive, intentional, thoughtful, effective way. The position's critically needed. What we've seen since Irina came on board is she immediately, her plate filled up in about a day. And a lot of it was projects that we had all been juggling. By we, I mean Stephanie, me, Brian, the solicitor, public services commissioner, planning director, purchasing agent. I don't want to leave people out. We have, help me out, Mr. Ailes. There are other department heads in that mix, engineering, just a whole range of folks who's the grant director has done a lot of work on sustainability grants. A whole array of people whose work crosses into sustainability. And by bringing Irina on board, it was, we were able to have her start to run point on things that we were all looking at each other and handing off back and forth. And I'll say this, and you've heard me say this before, we were very confident we were getting somebody outstanding in Irina. What she has done in stepping into projects in midstream and taking the reins of them and getting us all in both us internally and outside consultants and partners, just moving things forward, which is a set of skills in itself. And then being able to devote a lot of time and energy to the climate action planning process, to seeking out new opportunities, to building our collective knowledge around sustainability, to working with our many sustainability related and focused boards and commissions. Just a lot of incredible work that she's doing, that some of it was getting done by other people who were, overloaded with other things, and some of it wasn't getting done yet. So really important. And then, turning last, and I think last just because he's the newest on board, but the value, the need, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I think, we all who weren't well enough aware of it prior to last year this time certainly are now. And I think Councilor Rand said it earlier, applauding all of us, applauding the whole community for supporting, recognizing and supporting these first steps on our shared journey towards really becoming the most inclusive, diverse community we can be, a community where, and these, I often wonder whether I like our job title for Abu better or the school district's job title for Dr. Morgan better. But I think all the words together, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, opportunity, access. There are many people in Beverly who don't feel as seen, who don't feel as safe, who in fairness and in truth haven't had the same opportunities and access to opportunities that they've all always deserved. And so I think there's no way to say it enough, but I am thankful that we've all together been able to move forward with getting Abu on board. And he also, I think we all felt really good about who we were hiring with Abu. Some of you had gotten to know him as a neighbor and as a community member and as a member of the Human Rights Committee. And I was getting to know Abu over the last year as well in those same contexts. And, we were excited to hire him, and he's doing incredible work, building relationships, partnerships, bridges throughout the community, both in, obviously inside of city government, but well beyond, right on through all the different sectors of our community. And it's early on, but, he's, as I said, he's a talented person. I'm every day I'm excited at the work he does. And I feel we're on a good run together of being able to find and bring really talented people in to volunteer in the city and into work in the city. And so I think we couldn't be in a better place. So I hope that helped to answer the question, Councillor.
Yeah, I think to take a moment and think about the value added for the additional positions to the executive branch and everything that they have brought and provide as resources to help all of us out. It's really made a difference. I can see it as a city councilor. And so I'm glad we were able to sort of work together collaboratively to provide those additional resources. I think we've all benefited from that, sort of in the same way that we've benefited from, on the council side from Mr. Perry. But I'll wait until Mr. Bryant speaks before we talk about that. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman Flaherty.
Yes. Councilor Feldman?
Thank you. I just had one quick question regarding on page 19, the line item for other expenses and the fact that I know it says that the $56,800 will be used for the equity audit. And I guess my question is does that mean that work will be complete and that there won't be any additional funding for that bucket basically for FY22 after the audit, and that we aren't projecting any more work in that line item specifically for that year?
So thanks, Councillor. As best I've been following the numbers here, we need about $25,000 in fiscal year 22 to pay the remaining contracted amount for the consultants for the racial equity audit, which leaves about another $30,000 in that line. As you can see in the text here, there's a small amount, about $3,200 in additional HR funding, and that's to help us try to do try to be more effective at building more diversity into our applicant pools as jobs become open and available. But yes, it looks like we got about $30,000 still to work with in that line. We haven't decided on our own yet how it all is supposed to get spent. Correct me if I'm wrong, Abu and Mr. Ailes. I think we're looking at potentially some additional training this year, but we don't have a hard plan for every dollar in that line yet. And that's probably a good thing. Abu, do you want to?
Thank you, Mayor Cahill. Yeah, that's correct. I think that money is going to be open for us to really explore opportunities to expand on our initiatives. And again, as Mayor Cahill alluded to, there's lots of training that we'd like to do with our staff and get them up to speed on unconscious bias training and microaggressions and things like that. So as we're looking to diversify our workforce, we're also going to be able to support that with better understanding and communication and knowledge across the board for us. So that money will help us to get to that point where we are able to provide our staff with additional training or knowledge-based applications that we can use to support our initiatives.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from Finance and Property or rest of the council before we move on? Mayor, thank you and I'm sure you'll be available for any other questions we have, not only for your executive budget, but also for the rest of the budget. I'm going to bring in Jerry Perry, a budget analyst. He's going to give us an overview. His budget is just basically 50% of what the finance director's budget is. And so what he's going to do is give us an overview of the budget that he gave us earlier. Thank you. Mr. Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Good to see everyone. So this is my annual overview of the budget, as I traditionally do. I guess I'll start with probably the most important thing I'll say the whole evening, which is extremely important. It's my opinion based upon my analysis of both revenues and expenditures as articulated by Mayor Cahill's budget. It's my opinion this is a balanced budget. I believe that if this budget were to be passed by the city council, you would be successful in achieving a tax rate at the end of the calendar year. The state will not certify a tax rate without a balanced budget, and as such, I think revenues do match expenditures, and I do not anticipate a deficit given the circumstances as provided by His Honor the Mayor. Some quick thoughts. As you know, I sent you a memo last week on some of my commentary. I hope you got that and had an opportunity to review it. I'll try to touch upon this quickly, and then we can move on to your various budgets. The overall budget increases by 3.59% for FY22 from last year. It's an increase of $5,005,289 from the previous year. It does go up 2.5% as allowed by state law. That's consistent with both the Financial Forecast Committee's analysis and recommendations when they did their work earlier, as well as the capital improvement planning report done by the administration and the finance director. So we are staying consistent with our long-range financial planning. The budget does not use any stabilization funds this year. As some of you recall from last year, we had to do that when we were in the middle of the COVID. We didn't know what we were doing with, but I'm thankful we didn't have to do stabilization fund transfers to balance the budget this year. The administration suggests the usage of $875,000 in new growth. This is a little bit less than you've seen in prior years when you do an analysis. However, given the COVID situation, I agree with the administration's view on this. I think it's the right approach, and I support the $875,000 of new growth as part of the revenue source within the budget. You'll see a couple other things. There's a drawdown from retained earnings and recreation fund of $80,000 and a small drawdown of $12,476 from the Senior Citizen Center retained earnings as well to add to the budget. And in a minute, I'll get into the water and sewer budget with regard to those areas. With regard to expenditures, the schools are receiving a 3.3% increase from FY21. The total increase from the past year is $2,090,602 for the entire total school budget for the public school system of $65,376,407. So it's pretty consistent with some of our planning. I know that the schools are going to be using some of the ESSER funds to offset some of their expenditures this year, but I thought the schools did a pretty good job and it was pretty reasonable in nature. And it's my understanding in my dialogue with the municipal officials that this budget will hopefully meet the challenges that the school department faces this year. From my observations and in my view, the mayor has put a little bit more of an investment on the municipal side compared to other years there, which I think is kind of a good decision from my perspective. Some of the areas that he's had to do a larger investment, obviously, is debt. The mayor mentioned this a little bit last year. We know that the debt is going up basically because of the middle school and the police station, something we were all planning for. My compliments to the finance director. I know I've talked about this in the past, but he's done a great job with refunding and bringing down the bond rating to give us a reduced anticipated debt schedule, which has saved us money. We were actually considering several years ago using stabilization funds this year to get there, but I think the good work done by the finance director achieved that, and we're not able to draw down from that. As you'll see, and I'm sure you'll talk about, sanitation costs have gone up quite a bit from 2.6 million to 3.3 million, or 29.1% increase. We know that, and I'm sure that Mr. Ailes will talk about this later, but that's being experienced by all the municipalities in the area. It's just the cost of collecting and disposing of trash is tremendously going up, and something that they've been able to address from a budgetary perspective. I do like the fact that I've always felt all along I'm kind of wearing my management hat a little bit, and understand that the administration is going to add another FTE to the IT department. I think that's a wise decision. We can see the challenges that they faced in this COVID environment. I think that's a good idea. A couple more police officers, I'm told, to be brought on board, and this is the year that the public safety dispatch is coming on board with a budget, which I'm sure that the Chief LaLatcha will explain to you will help us get more police officers out in the street and help with that area. So all positive things, and I appreciate the fact that I think this year between the education and the municipal side is a little bit more balanced than we've seen in prior years. I do want to spend a couple of minutes on the water and sewer rates. This is probably the area I'm going to suggest to you as councilors you spend some time on and focus on a little bit when we get into the enterprise funds. It's an area I certainly had conversation with the finance director about even this afternoon on some of these issues. You will see the overall budget for the water budget is increasing by 4.3%. And what it means, what the administration is recommending to you all is that you go from $3.02 per 100 cubic feet to $3.17 per 100 cubic feet. Now that is only 0.9% of an increase on the rates. However, in order to offset that 4.3% increase, the administration is recommending to you the transfer of $900,000 from retained earnings, water retained earnings. We were certified at $1,151,412. So the administration is suggesting that we use 78% of the fund to balance the budget. It is balanced in my view, but the reason I raised this, and let me go into the sewer rates and I'll come back to an overall comment about both water and sewer rates. With regard to the sewer rates, it's a 6.2% increase by the prior fiscal year. The administration is suggesting that we go from $6.18 per 100 cubic feet to $6.24 per 100 cubic feet, again, for only 0.9% increase on the rates. However, they are recommending $805,141 be drawn down from retained earnings as certified by the state, or 70% of the fund balance in the retained earnings. I would bring to your attention, if you're marking your notes there on the water and sewer rates, you'll have your dialogue about this when you get to page 128 on the water rates, and on page 136 with the sewer rates, you'll see that, and we'll hopefully have some more conversation when we get to that. The administration has also clawed back approximately $400,000 from the SESD. We have approximately 20% of the budget of SESD. And just like we do here with general fund with free cash and retained earnings, we have, money that goes in, money comes out. We have turnbacks, things of that nature. From time to time, the finance director analyzes the reserves that we have in the accounts over there, and he can call upon the SESD to claw back money if he thinks it's necessary. Given the fact that we're drawing down over $800,000 in the sewer rates, I think it's a wise decision to protect the fund balance there for next year. And I support that action as well by the finance director. Why do I raise this? It's important you understand that because we're drawing down
Anybody else lose him?
so much next fiscal year and support the foundation of what next year's budget looks like. Because we're drawing down so much of the fund balance, we may, it's my opinion anyways, we'll see how things shake out. There could be some more revenues or less expenditures, but there's a distinct possibility you're going to see a lower retained earnings of both water and sewer next year, which means we would not have the same capacity to draw this amount of money to balance the budget next year. And I think that for those councilors who will still be with us next year, you need to prepare yourself. There's a distinct possibility you'll see an even larger increase in water and sewer rates in next year. So it's something you need to be privy to. Certainly we can talk about it in a more robust manner when you get to the water and sewer enterprise funds, but it's important that you as councilors be aware of that. And I'm sure that either I, the mayor, or the finance director can certainly answer any of your questions when you get to that. In closing, simply put, as I indicated earlier, it's a balanced budget. It's certainly gone to the days of 1995 where you don't have those problems. I think it's a pretty good budget from my perspective. I like the balance between municipal services and the educational services of the community. I would recommend this budget to you from a purely financial perspective. I defer it to you as councilors from a policy perspective. As most of you know, for the newer councilors, you have the legal authority to cut or reduce these budgets if you so desire to do so. And I'm sure as many of you veterans know, you're not allowed to increase the line items if you are, but certainly I defer to your policy decisions with regard to whether you think reductions in appropriations should occur. And I guess, and finally, in closing, I just want to thank everyone, the mayor, the finance director, the department heads and staff, city auditor, the city clerk, and obviously I can't forget my bosses, the 9 of you, the city councilors. I really appreciate working with you. It's been fun. I certainly enjoyed my time with you, and I stand ready tonight to answer any questions you may have or to support you along the way through your budget deliberations. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if any of your colleagues so desire to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Any questions on finance and property? Hearing no questions from finance, the rest of the council have questions for Mr. Perry. Well, Mr. Perry, you must be getting good at this because we have no questions, but I guarantee you there'll be some questions along the way, so don't feel too good. So we're going to go on. We have about 6 or 7 department heads. First up will be Brian Ailes to talk about the assessors, IT, enterprise funds, and revenues. Mr. Ailes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Before I get into this, I do just want to say, as a general comment here, we're going to work through a lot of these departments over the next couple of days, have some good dialogue. There may be some questions that arise that I might not have readily available in terms of an answer, or our department heads might not, but we can certainly take it as a note and get back to you. I think, Councilor Rand, you raised one today that we'll get back to you on before the proceedings draw to conclusion. In terms of the finance department, we overall manage a number of functions. The accounting department is technically within the finance department, IT, which is information technology, the assessors department, the treasurer and collectors department, as well as procurement. And Dave Gelano, our procurement director, is here, and we can address that aspect of the budget separately when he speaks with you. But as for the other department budgets, collectively, year over year, we're looking at roughly a $16,000 increase year over year. We have roughly about 25 staff in those departments. And there's a couple major themes that you'll note as you go through the individual department budgets. The first is that within the accounting department, we house all of the city's property, casualty, liability insurance. And so that's roughly a $900,000 line item for this current year budget, the FY22 proposed budget. That is an increase of about, I want to say $40,000. And that has to do with the new police station coming online. We know that our premiums will go up because of the value of that new building. And so we're budgeting for that. Another piece that you'll note is within the IT budget. And there's two things that are going on when you look at FY21 compared to FY22. The first that someone mentioned previously has to do with staffing levels. We have felt the need to increase the staffing levels within that department by 1. The intent there is to have a new employee solely to focus on help desk support. We, as a city, this does not include the school side of things, but we collectively have over 250 desktop users. We have over 50 laptops. We have 130 cell phones, and we've got a number of different software packages to support our business operations that we look to the IT department to be experts on. So every time they get a call about a cell phone, or I can't log onto my computer, or I'm locked out of this, that takes away from the other 3 employees' ability to focus on long-term planning, the website support, the network infrastructure, our firewalls, all of the things that many of you probably understand go into an IT department, particularly of one within an organization of this size. We feel it's a really wise investment to put that extra staff member in that department. To offset that increased cost, we are seeing a year-over-year decrease in the lines called EDP services, which is effectively our license agreements for all of our software programs. FY21, we had some one-time costs related to the enterprise software system called Central Square, which is rolling out as we sit here this evening. Over the last month, over the course of the next month, it'll be fully operational. There was some significant costs built into the FY21 budget, which will not be recurring in FY22 budget. And so that's a way for us to absorb this added cost without having an impact to the bottom line of the budget. The other thing I do want to note within the assessors department that I want everyone to be aware of is they perform assessing functions throughout the city. I believe it's every 5 or every 7 years, I think. And Mr. Perry, you might know better than I do because it's every 5. We have to go through a revaluation process, and it's a significant undertaking. A lot of the work gets outsourced to private companies. We will begin that effort later in FY22. There are no expenses built into this operating budget for that, because we will come before you seeking a separate appropriation to cover the project, which in many in the past has spanned multiple fiscal years. And so we look at it as a separate standalone project that we would seek separate authorization from you for. But I do want you to be aware of that. So later in the fall or in the early spring, when we do have this conversation, you'll recall that that's a need the city has. Other than that, I'll stop there. I'm sure you'll have some questions about either functions of the departments or the budget itself. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the finance department.
Any questions from finance and property? Hearing no question, Council Vice President Rand. Then we'll go to Scott Hausman.
Thank you. I just want to confirm, Mr. Ailes, that the position you're talking about in information systems, that's the information systems, the line item is 11381.51127. Is that the vacant position that we're seeing there?
Correct.
Okay. And it says vacant, but it's a brand new position for this year?
It would be if it's approved by the council. We already have the job description set. We've worked with HR. We're ready to green light it as soon as the budget gets approved.
Okay, perfect. And that seems like a nice, any opportunities for hiring new positions. I'm always thinking about that funding we're putting into HR to increase our the network casting for diverse applicants. So that seems like a nice opportunity there. And then thank you for confirming that. My only other question was actually, let's see, page 30. It's line item 11413588803. Under revaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just tell me, is that the process we have to go through when the Cummings Center does not agree with our tax assessment?
So
is that what that is?
There is some support for the Cummings Center appraisal within this line item. The assessors department has, thousands and thousands of unique, thousands and thousands of properties that they value every year for purposes of setting the tax rate. There are very unique properties within Beverly that require experts to come in. So this is like our ability to go and hire an expert appraiser that knows, public utility asset valuations, and so it's things like that we rely on this line to support. And ultimately, it does support our ability to substantiate our valuations. If in fact we do end up going to the appellate tax board with a taxpayer, having these expert opinions only helps the city's position through that litigation process.
Okay, got it. So is that almost like a consulting line, or is that done in-house, or those are all specialists, you're saying?
These are all specialists. Yep.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hausman?
Thank you, Chairman Flaherty. Yeah, I really have 3 things I'd like to ask about. Actually, the first one's not really so much an ask as it is a reflection. I've spent some time, as perhaps many councilors have, working with the IT department, and I guess I can't really sing their praises highly enough. What they do with what little they have had, in my opinion, has been nothing short of phenomenal. And so I'm really glad to see them getting extra resources and also getting a better sort of physical facility to work in. I'm very happy to be seeing the work that's been going on down there. I do hope that over time, as the old police station is renovated and City Hall is expanded, that perhaps they can, move their offices out of the basement. But at least for the time being, I'm really pleased to see that they're getting the extra resources and better conditions. We only have to look at what happened with the ransomware with Colonial Pipeline to understand how incredibly important the functionality is of that office and the need for them to be always on the top of their game. So I'm really pleased to see that, this addition being made to the budget. I think it's a really good one. The other two are sort of more questions. One is very specific and one is fairly general. And I didn't ask any questions of Mr. Perry because I really wanted my question to sort of be a joint question to both of you in addressing this. One is, as chair of finance, as chair of Financial Forecasting Committee, we this year, as we do on most years, projected a deficit going into the budget season. And so for either one of you, but I'll start with you, Mr. Ailes, if you could just sort of address how the administration goes about the process of taking the information from that report and coming up with a balanced budget when, we started out showing a deficit gap. And I'll hold my next question until after we get, some kind of response on this.
Well, without reviewing the actual financial forecast document that we produced close to 6 months ago, it's tough for me to reconcile the specific items. I'm happy to go that exercise.
Yeah, more generally, yeah.
So generally, I'm happy to talk about that. So generally, 6 months prior to the start of the fiscal year, the committee, the Finance Forecast Committee, sits down and makes some somewhat general assumptions around what they expect in terms of revenues and what they expect in terms of expenditures. And at that point in time, there are still many unknowns that we need to kind of take and put a stake in the ground around and say, this is where we think our healthcare costs are going to be. This is where we think our trash and recycling contracts are going to come in, but well in advance of actually knowing and the dust settling around that. So as we get closer to the budget process, a lot more of those variables become clearer. And it's at that point that we're able to, based on where the variables are falling, make other types of spending decisions when the mayor sits down to build his budget. And some of those decisions can be things of, certain staffing levels that may need to be modified slightly, or certain initiatives that, maybe a year ago might have been something the city wanted to do, but as we get closer and the budget's not balancing, maybe we can't do as much of it as we wanted to or would have liked to a year ago. So these are all the types of decisions that go into ultimately balancing a budget. Another aspect of it has to do with school spending and what we're carrying for school spending costs. State aid is another major component that's unknown when we're building the financial forecast, but is a good example of this year because it helped us close the gap, because state aid came in $600,000 more than we had built into the forecast. We also had the opportunity that Mr. Perry mentioned, given our good bond rating, given our good past budgeting practices and our good ratings report from Standard & Poor's, we were able to refinance a boatload of debt. And that just carved hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest payments out of the budget, creating capacity to do the initiatives that we're talking about and that we're going to go through over the next few weeks in this review process, both on the school side and on the city side of the budget. And so those are the types of things that happen in the 6 months between the financial forecast getting solidified and the ultimate budget getting submitted. But I think you'll find it interesting if you were to look at where the financial forecast set the total spending, budgetary spending. It tends to be close to what we ultimately submit for a budget. It's just that some of the priorities may need to shift to get that budget to balance.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. Mr. Perry, would you want to?
Sure, Counselor. Brian answered probably 90% of it. Ironically, I have this right in front of me as he was speaking, so I was looking at the spreadsheets. We got a little bit of relief in the educational costs that we'll be talking about. It's my understanding that the schools will be able to use some ESSER funds this year, and they've been pretty good helping out the mayor and working with the budget. So we got relief there. The debt was huge. There's no question about it. Brian talked about the debt, and we certainly got more state aid was one of the huge factors. So all in total, the spending on the school side, the additional state aid, the debt issues, all of that is what really made us be able to balance the budget. I would say to you, Councilor Houseman, I say this to you and Councilor Ames, who's out there. This is the first year since I've been with you, anyways, that we adhered to the city ordinances where you got your work done by the end of the calendar year. And I can assure you, and I'm sure Mr. Ailes will confirm this, it was extremely helpful to get it done during that time frame, because that gave Mr. Ailes and the mayor and everybody else an opportunity to take the work that you did and look at that when they're in February, March, and April, and to help them to formulate their budget. So my compliments to you and your colleagues on that committee to get that done in a timely manner, consistent with our ordinances. Bottom line to it, very helpful. Those are basically the reasons why we're able to balance the budget.
Okay, thank you. And then my third and last question is really directed again to both of you. I sort of want to follow up on my questions with the mayor about the additional staff and the resources that added sort of value to helping the council and the city as well as his office. Mr. Ailes, perhaps if you could reflect on the value that you see that the budget analyst adds to the city from the vantage point that you sit in. And then I guess I have a follow-up question for Mr. Perry, sort of the flip side of that question, if you would.
So I see the value in a couple different areas. First and foremost, which you're all probably aware of, is there's an independent perspective that's brought to the table when the council has its own budget analyst, right? It's that perspective that can look at what we as an administration are doing financially, making sure that the policies and the guardrails that we're operating within are appropriate, are best practice, are things that we as a city need to be striving towards. And that's an independent view because ultimately Mr. Perry doesn't report to the mayor. So he's going to give you his honest opinion around things. And there's some value there. Secondly, which you all may not recognize as much as I do, you probably do, but I am day to day, we do a lot of work out of this office. And it's not just the budget. The budget is a very small part of what we do, actually. It's treasury, it's collections, it's assessing, it's accounting, it's regulatory compliance, it's litigation. There's so much that comes through this office that the ability for Mr. Perry to be a resource for elected officials such as yourself, that when you have questions, you're able to go and pick up the phone and say, Mr. Perry, could you look into this for me? It lets me and my staff focus more on the work that we're hired to do and the work we're statutorily obligated to do by law. And so that's a tremendous help to me and my staff as well, when you have someone that's competent and responsive to the counselors. That's kind of secondary to maybe the earlier one I mentioned.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those reflections. I mean, I think from my own perspective, it has certainly been very helpful to the council to have. I think Mr. Perry provides a tremendous resource to the council and has over time. So, thank you. And Mr. Perry, from your perspective?
Well, this is my fifth budget, Councilor. I've never had this question asked of me. So, it was interesting. I came on board here, and I've gotten to meet a lot of people. I would say to you, and so I know the Chairman Flaherty was around for that, and maybe the mayor a little bit. I know President Guanci, I think, was around it. You go back to 1995 when the city got into trouble. And I wasn't here for it. Or it was 93, the mayor's point in 90. I hope I got the right year right. I heard about it when I was at the state level. But since I've been on board with all of you, the story I got, I wasn't here for it internally, but the council was pointing at the mayor was pointing at the council, but you had an unbalanced budget and it caused a lot of trouble. I think, at least from my perspective, if it's helpful to you, it was the most important thing I say all year to everybody is you have a balanced budget, in my opinion, of course. And I'm pretty confident with that too. And I think what's happened over the last many years is sometimes we take that for granted. Having a balanced budget, you get in so much trouble without a balanced budget. And the fact that, and I'm on record here, I think Mr. Ailes does a heck of a job for the city. But at the same token, I'm kind of keeping an eye on him and the mayor and everybody else. And the bottom line to it is, I think it's a check and balances. It protects the financial or the fiduciary position of the city. I have observed since I've come on board almost 5 years ago, numerous other cities are doing this now. It's no longer a unique position. Methuen, Framingham, I think Springfield, Westfield, there are others that have it. So more and more are copying what Beverly has done. So the bottom line to it is, it's a check and balance to make sure that the city doesn't get itself into trouble. And hopefully I have been able to add service not only certainly to the council, but to the administration and the citizens of the community. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I would tip of the hat to current chair of finance and property, who was involved in the current charter, and I'm certain played some role in the development of this position as providing a real asset, not only to the council, but to the city as a whole. Because my observation is that the working relationship between the finance director and the budget analyst can be and has proven to be a very positive one that has added a lot of value to the city. So thank you to Councilor Flaherty as well on that score. That's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I can't take full credit for that, but I will say that the city's financial troubles shaped our current charter, and in some ways might have gone too far, possibly. But I think it, for the most part, has stood the test of time, and the state really values the way our city charter was written, with the help of Michael Curran, our attorney at the time. And I think Mayor Cahill, Mayor Scanlon, Mayor Crean would probably attest to, and past city council, is how the balance has worked out, and clear lines of responsibility and accountability. And then the good thing about our current charter that we're reviewing on the side here, we're not doing it under a cloud of it being irresponsible or deficits. We're doing it with some clear minds, which I think will help fine tune our document even further. But that aside, Councilor Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be pretty brief. So just first, before I forget, a gentle reminder, Mr. Ailes, that you said you would send me an Excel of the budget. So I'm hoping that when you have a chance, and maybe you can just send it to everyone, I don't know, just to be even-handed about it, but thank you very much. And then regarding Councilor Houseman's comments about shrinking deficits, I mean, the only other thing that I learned over and over again as a member of the Financial Forecast Committee the last couple of years is also that you build positive revenue variances into the budget to make sure that that you will balance it in uncertain times, especially. So that's another big reason for people who are out there to really understand how that gap shrinks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ames. We're going to move on, and if you have any other questions, we can come back. We have, again, 4 or 5 other department heads. So we're going to ask Pauline Texera, the Human Resources Director, if she'd come forward and present her budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. This is the Department of Human Resources budget. The first section of the budget is related to salaries for employees within within the department. The purchase and services section includes seminars and training. That's for seminars and training for employees within the department. It includes human resources publications, seminars, memberships, webinars. It includes our human resources annual fall conference. And then we have employee physicals. That is for pre-employment physicals for our new hires. It includes DOT recertifications for our drivers that have CDL driver's license. And then the next line is where we have some significant increases in advertising. So we are broadening our outreach in an effort to attract a more diverse group of candidates. And in order to do so, we're posting our jobs in all different locations. Typically, we post our jobs on our city website and on the Massachusetts Municipal Association website, and that cost is about $75 per posting. The new places where we're posting jobs can run between $200 and $500 per posting. We're posting at diversity.com. We have other places that we want to post. We just can't yet until we get those funds approved. So that's the major change within this budget. And then the last is office supplies, which is office supplies within the Human Resources Department or things that we may need to purchase for job fairs or employee relations events.
I have a quick question. Have you found a difficulty, maybe not full-time, but especially part-time, in hiring people? Lately, I know restaurants and small businesses are having a very difficult time hiring people. They're looking all over the place, but they're having a difficult time. Have you seen that from the city side?
I haven't really seen that. We have received a lot of resumes for different positions.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear, because I know a lot of the small businesses are struggling trying to find some help. So that's encouraging signs. Does anybody from the Finance and Property Committee have any questions? Members of the council.
Yep, thank you. Just one quick question. I'm wondering, Ms. Teixeira, what projects you're anticipating needing part-time, overtime work for this year?
So for the overtime, it's typically for special projects, like for instance, if we have a career fair and where the employees are working overtime to go to a career fair. When we, like for instance, there's a project that our HR administrator, Jen Smith, works on, and it's a Affordable Care Act report. It's very detailed. It takes a lot of time. There's a deadline for that. So she may need some more time to do something like that.
Got it.
That's typical.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Hopefully you can get back to doing a career fair this year, right?
Well, we're actually
that would be nice.
having one. We're having a career fair working with Abu Toppin and Dr. Morgan, and hopefully we're shooting for sometime in August to have it.
That's wonderful. Make sure that I'm sure we'll get an email about it, but I'm excited to hear that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anybody on the councils have any questions or comments? Okay, Pauline, got off easy. Well, thank you for coming. I know you're a veteran. Yes.
Mr. Chair, sorry, I just typed me in the chat.
Oh, you did. All right, Councilor Flowers, go right ahead.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more. I know you were just mentioning that you need the funds approved to be able to continue posting jobs in increasingly divergent places. So you mentioned diversity.com, but you said there's a few others that you are hoping to be able to get approval, have the funds approved. Could you just talk a little bit more about some of what your plan is, or some of those sites?
There's some other sites. There's the NAACPjobfinder.com. That one's $400. I actually do have a list, and I don't have the full list in front of me. Oh, here's some right here. And I don't have the cost of all of them, but some of these that I've received from Abu Toppin. BlackCareerNetwork.com, BlackJobs.com. We're also working with Handshake, which is that actually doesn't really cost us anything, but that's Handshake is where we can reach out to colleges all over and do that all at once. And we can also attend job fair, career fairs at the colleges. So that's another thing that we're doing.
Thank you very much. I definitely am supportive of the city's efforts to think beyond where we traditionally have posted jobs or how we've traditionally gone about it. So I hear you saying that also means you need to put some support of the budget behind you in doing that. So I appreciate you coming and sharing with us about that today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other counselors have a question before we move on? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to Counselor Williams, the City Solicitor.
Good evening and thank you. The basic job of the law department is to protect the city's legal interests, and that fulfilling that role can manifest itself in a variety of different ways, day to day, week to week, year to year. Our day-to-day core function is to advise city officials, department heads, employees, elected officials, boards, and commissions with respect to their official duties to assist them in lawfully discharging the authority that they have to act. And we have, as I think most of you know, 30 different departments in the city, and most of them are governed by their own unique set of rules and regulations. So it's important for the law department to be well-versed and knowledgeable in a variety. We really have to have a significant breadth of knowledge with respect to the different things that folks throughout the city do. And then on top of that, we have the basic rules and regulations and laws that apply to all of us. The open meeting law, conflict of interest law, public records law, procurement law, and there are conflict of interest law. Those issues are constantly part of our day-to-day operations. And so we have to be available. We are available regularly to advise employees with respect to those issues. Other core functions include contract review. To date, this year, we reviewed 176 contracts. As of this time last year, we had reviewed 117 contracts. So that's a pretty significant increase, and it's really a reflection of how busy all the different city departments are with respect to the different initiatives that they are and projects that they are handling at this point in time. We have a system for managing claims that come in during the course of the year, everything from pothole claims to sewage backup claims, tree branches falling on houses claims. And we do typically send those to our insurance company. Those get evaluated by the insurance company. However, we do facilitate that and track that and stay in touch with the resident who's making that claim and collect information from all city or the relevant city departments to help review of that claim. The law department is responsible for drafting legal opinions, contracts, agreements, leases, licenses, deeds, easements, purchase and sale agreements. And this year we've spent a fair amount of time working on the solar project that is currently underway at 7 different locations throughout the city. We've done work on drafting reciprocal easements with respect to the sale of the Briscoe School. And we've also continued to do work on the One Water Street project, which included amending the lease and the special tax agreement. The law department is responsible for prosecuting and defending all court cases and any arbitrations. The arbitrations usually arise in the labor context. And the law department assists with the drafting and review of ordinances and orders that go to the city council as needed, and attends the meetings of public bodies, including the city council as needed. And all of this is just in the ordinary course of business. And assuming that there is no crisis or unforeseen event that arises. And of course, you know, a year ago, we were in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. Things have calmed down a little bit, or quite a bit since then. However, those issues are still very much a part of what the city is dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And now we are transitioning, as you all know, into a different phase of things with the reopening and the lifting of the state of emergency on June 15th. And so there are going to be new issues that are going to arise with respect to people returning to the work, the need for accommodations, questions around, you know, do we have rules that are the same as the CDC, and all of those things have to be sorted out. During the course of the last year, the governor issued 69 different orders, emergency orders. There were 2 major pieces of federal legislation. There was at least 1 piece of major state legislation. That's behind us now, but it's a good example of how something unexpected can be layered on top of the basic core functions of a municipal law department, which in and of themselves keep us busy every day, all day, every week. And so I think and then the other thing that we have this year that we're going to be spending time on is all of the city. The city has 9 city-side unions, and all their contracts expire on June 30th. And so we've already started negotiations for a new contract with many of those unions. I don't think we've met with everybody, but that can take a fair amount of time, especially given that there are 9 different unions. And we have litigation. We have about 12 active court cases right now. The majority of them are land use regulation cases. We have some more mundane type cases pertaining to requests to amend birth certificates, or we are drawn into a case because a condo association is suing for condo fees and we have a tax lien on a property. You know, that's not a heavy lift, but it does require somebody's attention and occasionally having to go to court for that type of thing. And as you know, the case that we have right now that is taking up a fair amount of litigation resources is the Burnham litigation, which we've talked about previously. And that's probably the primary piece of litigation we have right now. And that's the one line item in the budget that this year is a larger number than you've seen over the last 3 or 4 years. I think we were hovering around $135,000 for that line item for several years. It went down to $120,000 last year. And we're asking for more this year in order to be able to ensure that we continue to protect the city's legal interests in the with respect to all litigation. I would like to point out that litigation just out-of-pocket costs this year approach $40,000. So that means irrespective of whether or not we used outside counsel to assist us in those cases, we would be incurring those fees and costs anyway. And those costs, along with outside counsel hourly rates, they go up every single year. So if we are level funded, for example, the $135,000, obviously that, this year is not going to go as far as it might have gone 3 years ago. So I think for now, I'll pause and just to give people an opportunity to ask questions if you have any.
Any questions from Finance and Property? Any questions from the rest of the council? Council Hausman?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Solicitor Williams, could you talk about, obviously your department has a broad, deep set of responsibilities to attend to. Just, this evening's discussion is just really illustrates that, I think, really very clearly. Could you talk about the kinds of sort of lines of delineation in terms of providing support specifically to the city council?
So we're all available always to provide support to the city council. I know during the course of any given year, I work with different people individually with if they reach out to me and would like to draft an ordinance or some kind of order. So that's certainly something we have been able to do. Occasionally, councilors have questions that relate really to an issue that arises with a constituent. As far as official legal advice to the city council, boards and commissions, whether it's the city, any public body can only act as a public body, and that includes the city council. So if the city council were to be interested in any kind of legal opinion, it would have to vote to request a legal opinion. And I don't believe the city council has done that in my recent memory with respect, and while I've been the solicitor. We certainly, as you know, are available and attend city council meetings, and not so much recently because legal affairs I don't think is meeting in subcommittee, but we typically have attended those meetings to advise on questions that come up with respect to procedure, with respect to applications for licenses or other orders that are before the city council. That's kind of generically, but the job of the city solicitor's office is to represent the city's interests, right? And so we don't represent any one particular individual. And the job of the city solicitor's office is the way in which we protect the city's legal interests is to advise elected officials, among others, with respect to their official responsibilities. And that would include the city council as a body.
So could you sort of delineate the roles that the role that the solicitor's office has with regard to ordinances that are prepared by that might be prepared by a city councilor for submission to the council? I ask specifically because we did meet, you are correct, subcommittees have not been meeting remotely this year, with the exception of once or twice for legal. And at our most recent legal affairs meeting, when I asked something about the substance of the ordinance that was being discussed, what I was told was that the ordinance was reviewed by the solicitor's office to make sure that it did not, if I can paraphrase accurately, I hope, it did not run afoul basically of state law, that it was consistent with state law and not problematic, but that the wording of the ordinance itself was really not the role of the solicitor's office to attend to, and that was basically between the councilors.
So, I wasn't at that meeting, and so I don't know what was said. But I can tell you that I would view the solicitor's role in that situation to be one of, so elected officials make policy. Mm-hmm. So to the extent with the example of the ordinance with respect to shoveling sidewalks, that's a policy decision that two councilors got together and decided they would like to advance and promote that as a policy. The way that unfolded, and I think another example would be the bag ordinance, is when somebody reaches out to me, I suggest to them to come up with kind of an outline or a framework of what is their policy goal. What is it? I'm not like the language. What's your policy goal? What do you want to see happen? How do you want to see that happen? Who is going to enforce it? And what do you propose in terms of somebody enforcing it? And what are you thinking about in terms of a fine? What I will typically do in that situation is to cull together a sampling or a variety of examples from other communities that already have similar ordinances and send them to the city councilor and suggest that they go through it and come up with ideas or highlight what they like or they don't like. I send it to them in Word, and to cut and paste whatever it is that they would like in terms of language. And then once we have a working draft, to provide it to me, and I go through it and I edit it in a way that, to the extent necessary, is to clarify it, to ensure that there's no ambiguity, to ensure that it's consistent with state law. I try to stay out of policy discussions, although I think that Councilors Feldman and Rotundo may think I deviated from that a little bit on a couple of things that they were proposing with respect to the shoveling ordinance. So I think it's probably more accurate to say that, we tend to stay away from making a decision about policy as to whether or not the ordinance is a good idea. We certainly, in reviewing an ordinance, do it for the purpose of ensuring that it is a legally sound document and can propose language, and typically do try to come up with examples or samples of how it's been done in other communities. We don't typically do the ordinance out of whole cloth, because you have to keep in mind that it's the initiative of one, it may be the initiative of one or two city councilors. And the law department, really works for the city council as a body. And so we, the best answer I can give you is by way of example. And I think Councilors Rotundo and Feldman, I think that accurately describes what we did over the last 6 months. And I know Councilor Rand, we did work together on the bag ordinance, and her group had done a lot of the legwork with respect to the policy and the rationale behind the bag ordinance and what the science said about it and what the best practices are. That's the work of the policymakers. And then the law department can take that information and assist in crafting it into an ordinance.
How would you compare and contrast? How would you contrast that kind of approach of supporting the councilors on ordinances to the work performed for the executive branch in drafting and negotiating leases, contracts, easements, and so forth, which is fairly detailed language drafting work?
I don't know, how would you contrast it?
Well, with all due respect, I think I'm asking the question: do you see any difference between?
Yes. So I think that first of all, there are two separate branches of government, and the city council is the legislative branch and drafts ordinances. And we do provide detailed information to city councilors. We don't make policy with city councilors, and so I think they are comparable to the extent, you look at what the role of the executive branch is and what the role of the city council is. I think that it is a comparable. It is comparable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions from the council regarding this budget? Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams. We're moving on. We're going to bring David Perrinchief, our veterans agent.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Do you like to kind of talk about your budget of any
All right. Sorry, there's a slight delay, so just waiting. Okay, so this year I'd like to thank everyone for continuing the temporary helpline. That's going to be great to keep doing the work that we're doing with the restorations of the graves and just the upkeep of some of the markers around the city. And along with that, it looks like the only other significant change is to the supply line, which again will let us start to continually build up the needed resources to do the job correctly. As you know, we did purchase the Connex box, which we are turning into a makeshift workshop. So things are definitely moving forward on that front. So I'd like to thank everybody for that support, and the mayor's office for having the meetings and giving me the time to go over that and to get into the reasons why we need it.
Any questions from Finance and Property? Any questions from the council? Mr. President.
Yeah, no question. I just want to thank David for all the work that he does, not only throughout the year, but especially yesterday with Memorial Day. And even go back to Veterans Day, two very important events to the city that were affected by COVID. Veterans Day was a little subdued, but yesterday's ceremony was really, really special. The fact that you recognized 25 veterans here in the city of Beverly that were over 80 years old. I know some of them didn't attend, but the ones that were there you made feel extremely special. I mean, I was so excited to see Reno Gialongo there at almost 97 years old, a survivor of Pearl Harbor, somebody that I've known for close to 40 years. And to still see that he knows where he is, he's got a twinkle in his eye, and it just things like that you'll always remember. And because of your hard work and the mayor's work and the Veterans Advisory Committee, things like that happen. So thank you, and keep up the good work, David.
The Veterans Advisory Committee should get a lot of the credit. They are the ones who liaison mostly with the veteran posts to get me those names so we could put that together. And then obviously Senator Lovely's office helps out a lot with getting those certificates and everything put together.
And Jerry Gillespie lets us all know how hard he works all the time. One of our favorites. You would still think he was on the city's payroll. Lucky to have him in the city. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a good point, Mr. President. Jerry Gillespie was out there throughout the week and, putting flags down and organizing that and doing a pretty good job. And even on Memorial Day, he was out there early in the morning, starting out in the farms and rain wreaths. So kudos to him.
We had our largest turnouts this year from the citizens of Beverly. Even with the bad weather, we've never had the turnouts that we had this year. It was great to see.
Absolutely. All right. Hearing no more questions or comments, we'll move on. Thank you, David. We'll go on to another David. David Gelano, our purchasing agent.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My budget is pretty straightforward. I guess you could take a look at it if you have any questions. It's been an interesting year. We really had to step up with the PPE, with the COVID testing. I know more about COVID than I ever thought I would know. It's been challenging in some aspects, but super rewarding as usual in others. And continue to love the job and love what I do and love the people I work with. So any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Any questions from the Finance and Property Committee? Questions from the council? No questions or comments? Wow.
No, I think Councilor Hausman.
I saw you double here. You're the. I should just put here copy and paste what you every time you do something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, good evening, Mr. Gelano. Yeah, no, I had just a question. You and I have had occasion to speak a little bit about diversity efforts in the city from my work on the Race Equity Task Force and procurement. And I noticed that the advertising section of your budget has a 46% decrease. And I wonder if you could sort of talk about the intersection perhaps between the kind of outreach or advertising that you do, maybe just explaining this line item, but how that might intersect with the diversity efforts of the city.
Sure. So
thank you.
I'm legally required to advertise in a few different places. We have to advertise depending on the bid, either the goods and services or the central register. We advertise on the state's website, which is ComBuys, and we also have to advertise in the local newspaper, which is the Salem News. We advertise at the clerk's office. So that's the extent of our advertising right now. I would assume that should the decision be made to go in additional directions, that we would go that way. I'm just not sure where it would take us. The central register is where the contractors are used to looking for the bids, those in the business. The goods and services bulletin folks providing goods or services. That's where they're accustomed to over the years, looking for the bids. So it really is what I think to be probably the best places to advertise. Salem News, I don't know of anybody that really reads the newspaper anymore. We are legally required to advertise there, but certainly if the direction is to go and advertise somewhere else, we certainly would follow through on that.
Yeah, I don't know if we should say this, but I do read the newspaper, and I like reading the print. It's like my father.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I jump in on what Mr. Gelano said?
Correct. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do want to remind us that with both the race equity task force work and the racial equity audit that we're having done, I do believe that, these kind of conversations will lead to some recommended action items. As Mr. Gelano said, everything we do has to comply with state law. And I think we all recognize that we're trying to travel a path on a lot of fronts, and that will hopefully include more opportunities for minority-owned businesses, LGBT-owned businesses, and others, to be more actively involved in the work we do and have more opportunities. I think it's a part of this whole journey we're taking, and I appreciate the question, because I think we need to keep asking ourselves just how do we get there.
Thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's go to Councilor Ames, and I'll go back to you, Councilor Hausman.
Okay, I just want to thank Mr. Gelano for the work that he does. I have occasion to interact with his office. He's always terrific to work with. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Ames?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being with us tonight, Mr. Gelano. I was just wondering whether you or the mayor could answer the question as you're working through this audit. Generally, the state of procurement now in terms of equity and inclusion, if you've taken an assessment of the different contracts that you give out and what percentage go to non-white owned firms currently, first off, and then where you're hoping to go.
Well,
thank you.
Sure. As you know, this is all very new to all of us. And I think as we go forward, we're trying to do the right thing, the proper thing, the long range thing, not a quick Band-Aid fix. So, I think that's at the end our goal. I haven't looked at the racial equity or the makeup of the different firms. It's a bigger question too. You could look at a company that has a minority owned, but has all non-minorities working for it. And you can look at a non-minority owned that maybe has a lot of minorities or diverse makeup of it. So it's a bigger question. It's a big question that at the end of the day, we will get there. The racial equity, Mr. Toppin, we're doing things to try to move forward in the right direction. But I haven't actually taken the time to look, and I don't know, quite frankly, without asking people the question, and what that question would actually be. Is it the number of minorities working for you? Are you a minority-owned company? So, it's a big question. And like I said, we want to do the right thing. We're working towards the right thing. I'm not sure we all know what the right thing is at this point. And I think at the end of the day, we will find that and we will get there.
Thank you, Mr. Gelano. I applaud and would think nothing less of you than your desire to do the right thing. And I also appreciate the fact that this is new, right? This is, and that you're embracing change. I can tell you that there are a number of groups out there, long established, that certify companies to be, it's old language, but the National Minority Diversity, I think, Supplier, NMSDC, is one for minority-owned businesses, which is an old term. There's WeBank that certifies women-owned businesses. There's a veterans business group that goes through a very extensive as well surveying to make sure that they're qualified and they actually have the practices and they are actually veteran-owned as well for across the board. There is an LGBTQI group. There's I think a Native American as well. So I think that the resources are out there and ready for you to take advantage of them. And I'd be happy to come in and have further discussions with you on that, just because in my past, I've just had some experience. I think the most important piece of this is desire, right? And you're there. You're there. So, and I think then from there is to sort of evaluate the lay of the land as it exists, and then for us as a government to figure out where we want to go and how we want to get there. And I know we have a regional collaboration for businesses to sign up to a regional purchasing group, but I also believe that just as a community, whatever we can do with the monies we spend or invest, to just do it, just to be open. We want to be efficient and we want to do the best we can, but at the same time, we want to try to level the playing field as much we can, because I think there are opportunities out there that the city could definitely take some advantage of. So that's my 2
Like I
cents.
said,
Thank you.
it's a big conversation. I'd be more than happy. My door is always open. You're welcome to come in. I'd love to continue this conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you, David. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Steve Frederickson, our special department. Thanks for coming here, Stephen.
My pleasure. I'll start out by giving a brief overview of what it is we do. The Department of Municipal Inspections issues building permits, electrical permits, plumbing permits, gas permits, mechanical permits, sheet metal permits. Each of those permits has to undergo a review before we issue it. And each of those permits has to have at least one inspection and up to 7 or 8 inspections, depending on the type of project. And we issue probably, I think it would average around 4,000 permits a year, all told. In addition to enforcing those codes, we enforce the local zoning ordinance, and we enforce the Architectural Access Board regulations and floodplain regulations. So it's a lot to do. And this year has, I think a couple weeks ago, I came before you and told you our challenges with COVID. Our department's a little unique where we're required to go into people's private homes to do inspections. And so we had to be a little creative and a little flexible using remote inspections. And that worked out pretty well. And our permitting software allowed us to do remote, online permitting. So people didn't have to come into the office to submit plans, and we could review them remotely and do a lot of inspections remotely. So it's worked out well. One of the biggest accomplishments this year, at least in my view, is the demolition of 11 Charles. You'll see that in the budget. I think you appropriated about $150,000. We ended up getting it done for about $105,000. So that was something in the back of my mind. I think that was ready to come down 14 years ago when I first started here, and we finally got it done. So a lot of big projects happening. Water Street, Depot Square, Anchor Point, and ongoing construction of the police station. So I'm looking forward to those. The city's going to look a lot different in a year or two. That's about it. I guess I'm ready to answer any questions you might have about the budget. It's level funded. There's not a lot of surprises in there.
Any questions from Finance and Property? Any questions from the rest of the council? Councilor Rand.
Thank you. I do just have one question. Can you help me just to think about any changes coming up in terms of inspectional policies? I know you, if I remember correctly, you sit on the state board that is sort of reviews new policies. Is that correct, Mr. Frederickson?
Yes, I'm on the State Board of Building Regulations.
Okay.
One of the big changes coming up, the 10th edition, which is expected to be published, I believe it's January 2023. And they're shooting for a net zero. I shouldn't say shooting because the governor has ordered it, but they will anyway as net zero construction. And there's an advisory group on what that'll look like. We haven't really seen it yet. But that's the big change coming up in all of 2022. There'll be public hearings on it, and with the goal of implementing it by January 2023.
And will that affect your department? Will there be kind of like training to help your inspectors get up to speed on that? How does that work?
Yeah, there's constant training. We're required by law to have at least 15 hours of training a year. But it's in everything. It's not just energy code, but the energy code actually tends to take up quite a bit of everyone's time because it's new and it's confusing and it's lengthy and very technical. I can't really see that it will affect us very much because bottom line is I think it's going to require a third-party review and a third-party report. So basically what we'll be doing is making sure that the structure is designed according to the code, and then there will be HERS raters out there actually testing the structure to make sure it complies and then submitting a report to us. But they've been doing that anyway. It'll just have to be more lengthy and more complex. So the burden isn't added to us, it's added to third-party inspectors.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then I have one more question, just out of curiosity. I think a lot about sort of household water use, and this is probably a question that I could chat with Irina Keefe about as well. But I'm wondering if there are any kind of things coming up in regulations around household water use in Massachusetts that would allow things like gray water usage and just kind of promoting catching rainwater in a way that, and maybe that has nothing to do with regulations, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you know coming up that relates to sort of more sustainable use of water when it comes to building code and regulations.
Not that I've heard. That would be the plumbing code that would address that, but there's also what's called an International Green Energy Code, or Green Construction Code, I'm sorry. The state hasn't adopted that. That's where you would find things like that. And maybe it's worth the state looking at. There's a lot of codes out there that the state hasn't adopted. There's a property maintenance code, for example, that tells you how long your grass can grow. Not sure we want to adopt that one. But yeah, there are there's an international wildlife code, for example. I don't think we need that one either. But yeah, the green construction code might be something that would be worth looking at least as an optional code. And that would get into things like gray water usage, things like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really interested in that. And I think sometimes we almost take for granted how your department affects residents so like so much more than some of the other departments, just because when people are trying to imagine their own homes and reimagine their own homes, it's really, they need to interact with you in that process. So I think it's, I'm always curious about what you're learning about and what you know. So thank you, Mr. Frederickson.
Thank you.
Council Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Frederickson started when I was still chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So he's dated me by saying it was 14 years ago. I just really want to salute, and I'm glad the mayor is on to hear this, Mr. Frederickson's professionalism and expertise. In my experience, because I worked with, I think, maybe 5 different building inspectors over my 16 years on the ZBA, Mr. Frederickson really stands out, and I just think he does a terrific job, runs a great office, and kudos to both him and the mayor, for the adopting the electronic permitting. I think that's really increased the efficiency and added a lot of value to the city services. So I just sort of want to give a shout out to him and mention that I was dealing with an email that came in late on a Sunday night, I think about 8:30 on a Sunday night about 3 weeks ago, from a constituent that needed help with the building permit. I said I'd reach out to Mr. Frederickson, sent him an email, and to my astonishment, within about 20 minutes, so about 8:30 on a Sunday night, Mr. Frederickson had answered and solved the problem. So, as an elected official, it's sort of a 24-hour, 24/7 job. But talk about above and beyond. I just really, I want to thank him publicly for the kind of service that he provides. And I think, I guess that's it. It's really more of a shout out than anything else. I think we're just really lucky to have him on city staff. It's kind of a very quiet demeanor, quiet office, but as Councilor Rand said, has a very outsized impact on what goes on in the city, notwithstanding that sort of background operation. So thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. Just proves I have no life, I think. Responding to emails at Sunday night.
Well, likewise, perhaps.
Okay, any more questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Mr. Frederickson. Appreciate you coming in. We are going to have our last and final, but Bruce Doig will go over his department and a few others, and also the enterprise funds. So within his preview. Mr. Moore.
Sure. I'm not sure if Mr. Ailes wants to talk about the enterprise fund first. Yeah, I know he had to do some trimming this year. Unfortunately, last year with COVID, we lost probably about $75,000 in revenue from parking fees because we didn't charge any non-residents to come to Beverly, and we usually bring in somewhere between 70 and 80,000. We also lost money on our our camp programs because we only could have limited enrollment, and we actually had additional staffing costs due to COVID regulations. So it was a tough year from the enterprise funds perspective, but we're still healthy enough to continue on and hopefully have a great program here with our camps and our park program, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But Brian, you want to talk about the enterprise fund a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Mr. Doig. We went back and forth a lot on this, and ultimately what the intent of this is to provide robust services at our parks, right? Whether that's adult programming, whether it's kids programming throughout the summer. And the way we felt was the best kind of strategy to go about this, with what continues to be some uncertainty around the revenues for this, is to build a transfer from the fund balance in to support the spending levels for the Recreation Enterprise Fund. And what that'll do is it acts as a draw, so it infuses the money into the fund, because keep in mind the bulk of the revenues that go into this fund happen later in the fiscal year. right? They happen as people are registering for summer programs. And so if we infuse the money up front, it allows Bruce to perform the level of service that he wants to provide. And in the event that revenues do exceed what we've seen over the last year, it will effectively just replenish the fund balance. So it's almost like a contingency to utilize the fund balance in this way. And so that's just the general strategy, is why it might look a little different than it has in the past. And, you know, we're both here. We're happy to answer any questions or specifics about how this fund operates, or any specifics that are provided through this fund.
I am happy to say we brought in some our first revenues of the year for parking today. Unfortunately, with the weather over the weekend, we didn't bring in anywhere near as much as we thought we were, but we're off to a good start today. So things are looking up.
Councilor Randy, a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Flaherty. I have my favorite question for Mr. Doig. If you could tell me what park is the park of the year, that would be wonderful.
Well, all of our parks have been renovated, as I've mentioned before. So there's really none that the Park of the Year Fund was really created to pick a park every year and renovate it, get us so that they're all up to date. Now that this year, because it's been reduced for this budget as well, we're going to need a lot of that money for replenishing safety surfacing in the parks. That runs us about $15,000, $16,000 a year. So we'll be ordering that in the fall, and the folks from DPS replenish that throughout the winter. We will be using that for repairs. You know, unfortunately, as you all know, that we spent about $250,000 a few years ago to fix all of the playgrounds in the city, and due to vandalism and so forth, we're still seeing pieces that need to be replaced and so forth. So that's going to start to add up as well. So I'm expecting that the $25,000 in the Park of the Year Fund will be spent between playground safety surfacing and repairs to equipment that's broken now, because it's going to be needed to replace what's out there that needs to be replaced right now.
Okay.
Mr. Ailes?
And
Can you hold on one second?
Yeah, if I could just clarify, because I didn't want to mislead anyone. In terms of the Park of the Year funding, FY21 saw a reduction. As you all may recall, during the pandemic, we pared it down to the $25,000 level that Mr. Doig mentioned. The budget that you have before you for this evening replenishes that back to the historical level of $50,000 per year. So it is back to that level.
Thank you.
I apologize. In my rush to get out the door for the flag raising at City Hall, I left the copies of the my most recent printout, so I'm working off an old copy. So thank you for that, Mr. Ailes.
Ms. Rand?
it's like a gift just appeared in Parks and Rec. That's awesome. So when you say safety resurfacing that happens in the fall, that's the delivery of mulch that we often see around the city at different city parks?
Yes.
So, and I know this is super nitpicky, but I'd love it if that line item could just be called mulching, because I feel like for it to be called Park of the Year is misleading.
Well, and I'm not opposed to that. Again, when it was created by Mayor Scanlon and Finance Director Dunn at the time, it was, like I said, to pick a park every year and replenish the playground at those parks. You know, we did Bessie Baker, we did Lindsay, we did a number of parks over every year. So, you know, calling it what you call it, it really is now an ongoing maintenance fund with a lot more money than we had in the past for maintenance. There will be occasionally, like last year, we did some work at Livingston in addition to the CPC funds. And that this year we're doing the Wentworth Drive tot lot, which, you know, we're contributing some. There's the CPC grant and so forth. So, you know, it gives us the ability to contribute to some of these projects that we didn't necessarily have before. So.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, like I said, I know it's a bit nitpicky, and overall what's important is that the parks are getting this funding, but I would like to see, you know, some of you're obviously doing a ton of planning for kind of managing the equipment and the future of the parks and playgrounds. So I guess I just like to see that be sort of, maybe it's a smaller line item that's called, park equipment, special park equipment maintenance, and the 25,000 goes into maintenance, and that includes mulching. And like I said, I understand that that's just like, the city's not looking at this line item saying, what's the park of the year? But I just remember whenever I see that, I get excited that there's going to be a park of the year. So I want to kind of like, call it what it is, I guess, is my request. Thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing. I'm super excited to hear more about the planning that you're doing and the grant funds that you're trying to access to basically overhaul a whole collection of basketball courts and tennis courts. That's amazing partnership and work you've been doing, Mr. Doig, with the CPC and also the grants director and just the park grant program. So I'm really excited to keep seeing your awesome work. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Again, working with Mayor Cahill and Catherine Barrett from the grants office, we're hoping to get a significant grant for the park grant program and combine that with CPC and some other funds. And I've been saying it for a number of years that we're going to need between $500,000 and $1 million to replenish all of the courts in the city. We're looking at targeting probably the top 5 or 6 and spending $600,000 or so to do that. So we're working hard on it. We'll get the grant application in by mid-July, and hopefully we'll be approved. So thank you.
Let me know if there is any kind of letter of support that as a counselor or as a council that we can provide to help you get that funding. I think it's really one of the most important parts of the city that does require constant maintenance. And I think your department and public services does a great job of that.
Thank you. Again, we will be soliciting some letters of support. Those are due towards the end of July, but we want to turn them in with the application if possible on July 14th. So,
Mr. Doig,
Mr.
Doig, let's jump. Let's strike here. The fire's hot. City Council, as a council, we would love you to draft a letter prior to you breaking for the summer, if you manage to break. I know it doesn't always work out that way, but we would love to get a letter from the council. So we will talk with Ms. Barrett tomorrow, and we'll make sure that we get the right information to you folks. That would absolutely be a strong letter of support to help us with that grant application with the state. It'd be great.
Absolutely. It's interesting because not all cities and towns have recreation departments. And not only do they have recreation departments, but the amount of fields and basketball courts and tennis courts. We're very fortunate in this city, not only to have them, but having a plan, a proactive plan to keep them updated. Now, again, with vandalism and everything else, it's not perfect, but again, we were very fortunate in this city to have what we have, not only from the Parks and Playground program for helping the kids, but the idea of an overall recreation department to take care of the needs from kids to seniors is something we shouldn't take for granted. So thank you, Mr. Doig, for all you do for that.
Well, thank you. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Department of Public Services for all the amazing work they do. They go around to all the 30 fields in the city and the parks, and they spent about 2 weeks down in Lynch Park just doing the tree beds with mulch, and they have the crews out doing the fields. And I umpire in a lot of cities and towns, and I don't see any fields close to ours out there, and it's all up to them. They do an amazing job. So I can only take part of the credit. So thank you.
No, that's true, and we do appreciate that. But their time is coming in next week. We'll work with them, but they do a good job, and they have professionalized that department under Mr. Collins from a lot of great people who have helped, and they actually do it with a lot less people than they have done in the past. And compared to other cities and towns, as far as that department goes, less money as well. So they're very efficient. So they obviously do help, but obviously the relationship that you both have makes it a lot easier. Not, you can't understate that. It's not always that way in other cities and towns. So thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Feldman.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, I know we spoke with a lot of the other departments tonight about some of their work in kind of integrating some of the greater goals of the diversity and inclusion work that the city's doing. And I was wondering if the Parks Department had anything that they were working towards in their budget or in their programming this year to work towards those initiatives, because my children are obsessed with the Parks program. You could have like a Disney camp that I could send them to for $1 million and they would be like, nope, we want to go see Max at North Beverly. And the kids are so impressionable and such a big part of the future of that type of work. So I was wondering if your department had any ideas in that area or work in that area.
Well, we do. We've, and again, working with Mayor Cahill and working with Mr. Topman, we are looking to expand how we can become a more diverse workforce. We've always had a level of diversity within our department, but we obviously want to increase that and encourage more people to come work with us. Right now, I've been working with one of the assistant principals at the high school, working with Dr. Morgan, working with Mr. Toppin, and the mayor, trying to get the word out that we still have some positions available. We haven't had much luck getting information back, but we're still working on it. But our plan going forward is to work with the kids that are in the park program, encourage them to become counselors in training when they're old enough, and then recruit from the counselors in training to become employees, which we've always done anyway. But it's a matter of the feeder system. We need more kids in the feeder system, the CIT program, that of diverse backgrounds that we can then encourage to become employees. So it may take some time to get that ball rolling, but we're starting to work on it, and we're putting that plan in motion, even with some of our CITs now. But it is going to take some time. I still have hoping to get a couple of positions funded through the First Jobs program, and they may be able, the workforce in Salem may be able to send us some candidates as well. But we're hoping to still get a few candidates that of more diverse backgrounds that we can bring on board this summer. So it is something we're thinking about and are trying to plan for.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add to that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. So Mr. Joy touched on some of our efforts to try to have our seasonal workforce in the parks programs, look like more of the kids who are in the programs, and that's a really sustained effort that needs to happen around, getting more kids in, getting them into the ranks of CITs and on up. I also think you were asking more than that as well, and so I don't want to punt to this. But it is important that our consultants on the racial equity audit, they're experts at racial equity. We're not, and so I really and they're kicking off the core equity teamwork next week, and you, Councilor Feldman, have agreed to be part of that work, which is fantastic. And so I really do think that the work that goes on in the coming months around the racial equity audit will yield some real action items, an audit plan. And I think, right across all of our departments, and in particular our community service departments, because they interact so regularly with, such a cross section of the community, we've got to look to have some real actionable items coming out of this work. So I hope that's helpful to think about as well.
Mm-hmm.
No, it is. And I look forward to trying to be part of that work and that solution. So, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Flowers?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have 3 questions, if I may, and they're all sort of divergent from each other. The first actually just grew out of the conversation that Councilor Feldman began. And so my question, and I should know this, Mr. Doig, but the CITs at the park programs, that's an unpaid position, is that correct? Or are the CITs paid?
No, it's a volunteer position. In fact, they pay a small fee to cover some of the costs. We have a CIT director. We have, we give them T-shirts. We give them, a lunch and a dinner, typically throughout the year to reward them for participating. So they pay a small fee now to participate in that program.
Thank you. I'm thinking, I guess, down the road for our budgeting together collectively, Mr. Mayor, you as well, based on everything we were just talking about our goals. It suddenly occurred to me that positions like CIT positions are, to a certain extent, positions of privilege. And I'm not knocking them as a growth opportunity. I was a CIT and a camp counselor growing up as well. But I think as we're thinking sort of longer term in our budget and how we want to build those budgets to increase diversity and equity and inclusion and opportunity as well, young people who can afford to take on a summer job where they don't get paid, or in fact, end up paying a fee. That's not every young person. And so we may just want to be thinking about if there's ways that we want to support members of our community, young people in our community across socioeconomic lines as well, in stepping into these roles and then creating that kind of growth into counselors in our positions too. That might not be something for this budget, but it struck me as we were having this conversation that together that might be a priority that we want to build into future budgets.
And I should have said, I'm sorry, I should have said that we do offer scholarships. Obviously, if somebody can't afford the fee, it's not a large fee to begin with, but and yeah, I mean, I think again, we offer as much job training as part of it as possible. We've had kids tell us, their parents make them come in for an interview and they tell us, I'd rather be out making money than working for free, so that is in the back of a lot of people's minds. So we're going to continue working on it.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Doigan. I guess I want to be clear. I think it's not a criticism of your program or you alone. I think it's a shifting lens that we together might decide that we want to apply, because I think, all kinds of camps and all kinds of programs that use CITs or even camp counselors traditionally are not a highly paid job. And so I think that's a conversation that we together could have about, what our goals might be and how we as counselors could support that in your department as well. So that was sort of the genesis of my question. So not intended as a criticism, but more sort of a curiosity and then a growth for the future. Sure. My other questions that are really unrelated, if I may, one was Mr. Frederickson was mentioning that his department had moved to online permitting for building permits and sort of grew out of necessity for COVID. But I wondered, I know your department, Mr. Doigan, you specifically end up juggling a lot of requests for use of fields. Is there, and I'm thinking about budget implications down the road, are you thinking that might be, online permitting would be something that the Parks Department would move towards to both alleviate that from your job, but potentially also streamline your ability to get those?
Yeah, well, we're going to be moving to Central Square for use of the parking permits at Lynch Park. People will be able to use credit cards for the first time and scan their card to pay, which will be very helpful for a lot of people. And we're working with the engineering group on that now to make sure that can be implemented. We're having a couple of technical difficulties, but we're working it out. In terms of our regular field permits, part of the problem there is that there's so many variations on permits. You have Beverly residents, Beverly non-residents, what percentage of Beverly residents. There's different fees associated with each of that. So if somebody just goes online to apply for a permit, they'll be able to apply eventually, but everything still has to be reviewed, still has to be, a final fee will have to be determined based on number of hours used, the level. We have a 5-tier structure for our permits, so based on the tier and the level of usage and so forth, and availability. Because, one thing we're seeing, and I know several of you have children that are involved in some of these programs, but it used to be you had Little League, youth soccer, youth lacrosse, and so forth. Now you have, I don't know how many AAU programs out there, and so they all want to use fields in Beverly. You've got the Vikings, you've got a number of others. So it's hard to determine who gets priority on the fields. We've always given priority to the Beverly-based youth organizations and the Beverly-based adult organizations, but you can't really automate that. So you have to kind of personally review every permit request and make sure that it fits within our matrix, and and allot the fields to the people who are the highest priority within our matrix. So we are working towards that, but it's going to be very difficult to implement a full permitting process where they apply, pay, and get a permit printed out. So, but it's something we're working towards.
Thank you, and that is helpful to hear. the different pieces that go into your permitting versus, a straight building permit, for example, that might be more possible. My final question, if I may, is just, I was curious about the parks that are being used for the park program. I know in some years, I seem to recall, for example, the field near Hannah School was a park for the park program and did have a bathroom facility, a porta potty that was there. I was curious if there's plans for parks being used this year to have porta potty facilities, and how that would work within the budget, if so.
Sure. Well, my first year as director, I was hired in 2003. My first budget process in 2003, our budget was cut in half. The first thing that was removed from the budget was porta potties, because it was very expensive to have porta potties at every park that we staffed, plus some of the ones that were heavily used by Little League and so forth. So at that time, we made it available to everybody who uses a field the opportunity to get a porta potty placed there. Even for a while, we were ordering them for them and so forth. That got to be very cumbersome because they weren't getting delivered when they were supposed to be delivered. They weren't getting picked up when they were supposed to be picked up and things like that. And sometimes the bills were coming to us when they should have gone to other people. But either way, the unit that you're talking about at Hannah is actually paid for by the YMCA, because years ago, our staff wanted to move our park program from the softball field over to where the basketball court is and the gymnasium at Hannah School. So we moved our program to that side of the building, and the YMCA started using the softball field for their summer camp program. So they come through the woods, they use the field, they pay for the field for during the summer, but they've been doing this for a number of years. And they get a porta potty every year because by state law, they have to have a bathroom available for their camp, because they are a camp versus we're a municipal program and not a licensed camp. So, but the good news is that when we're at Hannah School or North Beverly School or Centerville, typically we're able to develop a relationship with the building custodians to be able to let the kids go in and use the facilities. Sometimes it works out great. Other times, it just has to be ironed out, but we do the best we can to work out that type of a program. But again, a lot of our parks are not at schools and don't have that capability. And we just don't have the budget at this point to put porta potties at every, we're going to be staffing 13 parks this year, including Apple Village, which is a private facility. And they also pay for our staff to be there and have bathrooms available. But to have another park that we would have to pay for would be expensive as well. Again, it's something that we could certainly do down the road if we had the budget available to do it. But I know there's been a lot of concern about some of the parks having the park program there and the kids not having bathroom facilities immediately available. So it's something we've talked about over the years numerous times. But it is a good program. They have the ability to go home if they're close enough. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the kids that come, are younger that, don't have the ability to just jump on their bike and ride home. The parents usually bring them in the morning and walk them home in the afternoon. So, but again, it's certainly something we could talk about going forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and definitely would be something I would be happy to talk about and be part of creating a solution for, because I agree with you. I think for older children who can come and go, that's the beauty of the park program as it's created. There's that freedom. But I think you're absolutely correct. And I was thinking about that as well. For children who are, dropped off at the park program, parks like, I understand Dick's Park is being added back this year, if I'm correct, which is wonderful. But parks where children may not live as proximal to and it's hard to walk home, or they're too young. So I would love to be part of that conversation to help find that balance.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Ames?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Doig, thanks for all the work you've been doing. I mean, I think the parks across the city are such an asset. And I just wanted to say that if you needed help with outreach in terms of employment, for the CITs or the counselors, nothing would make me happier than to have Ward 3 counselors at Ward 3 parks. So anything that I can do to support your efforts, I'm in your corner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, I believe that finishes tonight. before I ask for adjournment for the finance and property, tomorrow night we have a meeting at 7 o'clock via Zoom, and that will be our last one. Next week, next Tuesday, we will go live at City Hall for the first time. Does anybody have any final questions or comments before we close? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to close finance and property, adjourn finance and property?
So moved.
I'll second that.
So moved.
Roll call.
Ames? That's actually me. So, Ames?
Yes.
No, we're doing a roll call for finance and property first.
Oh, right. So just a three. Okay. So Rand, I don't remember. It's Rand,
Yes.
Flaherty, and
Paul had to leave to go back to work.
okay. All right. So Rand, yes. Flaherty.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Finance and
And
property adjourned. Now committee of the whole.
Yep. Okay. So do I usually include everyone for
Yes.
committee of whole? Okay. Thank you. Ames,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Feldman,
Yes.
Flowers,
Yes.
Hausman,
Yes.
Rotundo,
Yes.
and Rand.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Thank you. everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
See you soon.